For 10 years, Kang Min-Jae enforced one rule across his empire. No love. In his world, love was not weakness because it hurt. It was weakness because enemies could use it. So he erased it. From the highest floor of his Seoul tower, the Korean Mafia king ruled with the kind of silence that made powerful men nervous. His decisions were precise. His distance was deliberate. Nothing in his life was accidental anymore. Until the night the past refused to stay buried. It was supposed to be routine. A late drive. A quiet intersection. A red light that meant nothing. Then Min-Jae's gaze shifted. And the world narrowed. Zainab Okoye. Crossing the street like she had every right to exist in a life he had already sealed shut. But it wasn't her presence that made his pulse stall. It was the child walking beside her. Small hand in hers. Steady steps. Familiar eyes. Eyes that looked exactly like his. For the first time in 10 years, Kang Min-Jae felt something inside his carefully controlled world fracture. The first rule Min-Jae ever learned was simple. Feelings make you weak. He was 16 the day he watched his father lose everything. Not money. The empire still stood tall, but power, respect, control. All because of a woman who walked away smiling while the boardroom burned behind her. Min-Jae never forgot the sound of the door closing. In the years that followed, he rebuilt what his father's soft heart had nearly destroyed. Piece by piece. Deal by deal. War by quiet corporate war. By 28, he had done what seasoned tycoons twice his age could not. He became untouchable. The world called him brilliant, ruthless, surgical. He preferred disciplined. While other heirs drowned in scandals and glittering distractions, Min-Jae sharpened himself into something colder. Something precise. Emotions were liabilities. Attachments were leverage waiting to be used against you. Love was the most dangerous weakness of all. So he outlawed it, first within himself, then quietly within the culture of his empire. No office romances. No emotional entanglements. No exceptions. People whispered about it in the hallways of his glass tower in Seoul. The infamous clause buried deep inside executive contracts. The silent way relationships inside the company simply disappeared. Min-Jae never raised his voice. He didn't need to. His presence alone carried the weight of final decisions. Tall, composed, always dressed in dark perfection, he moved through the corporate world like a man who had already calculated every possible betrayal. And removed it. Yet beneath the ice-perfect control lived something far older than discipline. Memory. Some nights, very rarely, Min-Jae would stand alone in his penthouse office, city lights flickering across the glass walls, and hear that door again. Closing. Always closing. His jaw would tighten almost imperceptibly. His fingers would still on whatever report lay before him. For exactly 3 seconds, the carefully built armor around his heart would thin. Then the moment would pass. Because kings who hesitate lose kingdoms. By 32, Min-Jae wasn't just powerful. He was feared in the quiet, respectful way reserved for men who never needed to prove themselves twice. Investors trusted him. Rivals avoided him. The media struggled to read him. No scandals. No lovers. No weaknesses. Perfect. Or so the world believed. What no one understood, what no analyst, rival, or board member had ever successfully predicted, was this. Min-Jae had not outlawed love because he was incapable of it. He outlawed it because he knew exactly how dangerous it could become when it finally found the right person. And somewhere far beyond the polished walls of his empire, fate was already moving. Quietly, patiently, toward the one woman who would make the king break his own rule. Zainab learned early that survival rarely announces itself with noise. It comes quietly, in the choices you make when no one is watching. The night everything fell apart, there was no dramatic storm, no cinematic warning. Just a phone call that lasted 47 seconds and changed the direction of her entire life. By morning, she was alone. No safety net. No powerful name to lean on. No one coming to fix it. So she did what she had always done. She adapted. Lagos was not gentle with dreamers, and Port Harcourt was even less forgiving with women who stood alone. Zainab moved through both cities like someone who understood the price of hesitation. She took the long shifts others avoided, learned skills no one expected her to master, listened more than she spoke, and slowly, quietly, she built something that could not be easily broken. Strength. Not the loud kind that demanded attention, the quiet kind that endured. Her apartment was small but precise, every corner clean, every item intentional. She woke before sunrise most mornings, not because she had to, but because discipline had long ago replaced comfort in her life. Routine kept the past where it belonged. Buried. At least most days. Because sometimes, usually when the city finally fell silent, memory slipped through the cracks. A voice. A look. A man whose presence had once felt dangerously close to destiny. Min-Jae. Zainab never said his name out loud anymore. She didn't need to. Some memories live in the body long after the mind pretends to move on. She had not been naive when she walked away. Hurt, yes. But not naive. Even then, she understood what kind of man he was becoming. The walls. The control. The quiet, dangerous way he kept the world at arm's length. Loving a man like that was never going to be soft. So she chose herself. Chose survival. Chose peace over proximity to power. And for a long time it worked. Her work spoke for her now. Her reputation moved ahead of her in rooms she entered. People trusted her calm under pressure, the steady way she handled crises others fumbled. They saw competence. They saw composure. What they didn't see was the steel forged in the moment she realized no one was coming to save her. Zainab didn't need saving anymore. That was the difference. The girl Min-Jae once knew had learned how to endure storms. The woman she had become had learned how to walk through them without flinching. And somewhere across the world, without either of them realizing it yet, two carefully built lives were already beginning to move back toward collision. The first report landed on Min-Jae's desk at 2:17 a.m. He noticed it because his system rarely allowed irregularities. Single mother. Private records sealed unusually tight. Relocation history fragmented. Most executives would have skimmed past it. Min-Jae did not. He sat alone in the low glow of his penthouse office, city lights scattered like distant constellations beyond the glass. One finger rested lightly against the file as his eyes moved, slow, precise, absorbing everything the paper tried very carefully not to say. It wasn't the woman's name that caught him first. It was the child. Male. Age 6. Blood type, rare. Medical notes, selectively restricted. Min-Jae's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Coincidences existed, but patterns told the truth. He leaned back slightly, steepling his fingers beneath his chin. On the surface, nothing in the report justified the quiet, alert humming at the base of his instincts. Everything was professionally ordinary. Too ordinary. Min-Jae had built an empire by respecting the moments that felt wrong before they looked wrong. His voice, when he finally spoke into the quiet room, was calm. Run it again. Across the encrypted line, his head of intelligence didn't question him. They never did. Yes, Chairman. Min-Jae ended the call and turned his chair slowly toward the window. Soul stretched endlessly below him, obedient, glittering, predictable. Unlike the file now resting open on his desk. The boy's photo stared back from the corner of the report. Dark eyes. Steady. Unsettlingly familiar. For exactly 3 seconds, something inside Min-Jae's carefully ordered mind shifted. Then the steel came back down. Because men like him did not react to ghosts. They verified facts. Within hours, the deeper pull began. School records. Hospital logs. Travel timestamps. Each new layer peeled back with surgical precision. Each new detail tightened something cold and focused in Min-Jae's chest. Not emotion, he would never allow that first. Calculation. But the more the picture sharpened, the quieter his office became. Because the boy didn't just resemble him. The boy carried his stillness. That same unsettling, watchful calm. Most children never learn this early in life. Min-Jae's fingers stilled on the desk. For the first time in years, something dangerously close to uncertainty brushed the edges of his control. He didn't like it. Not one bit. By dawn, the order had already been given. Discreet surveillance only, Min-Jae said quietly into the secure line. No contact. No visibility. A pause. Then, understood, Chairman. The line went dead. Min-Jae remained where he was, unmoving, eyes resting once more on the boy's photograph. The king who had outlawed love was not a man who believed in fate. But something about this situation felt like a door he thought had closed long ago was beginning, very slowly, to open again. And Min-Jae had never ignored a warning sign in his life. The confirmation arrived at 4:06 a.m. Min-Jae was still awake. He often was. Sleep had long ago become optional, another indulgence he'd trained himself to function without. The city beyond his glass walls was quiet, the kind of deep, pre-dawn silence that made every sound inside the penthouse feel sharper, including the soft chime of the secure file opening. Min-Jae didn't move at first. His eyes remained on the skyline, posture composed, hands loosely clasped behind his back. Only the slight tightening of his jaw betrayed the shift in the air. Chairman, his intelligence chief's voice came through the encrypted line, unusually measured. The results are conclusive. A pause. Even the city seemed to hold its breath. Probability of paternity, 99.98%. Silence followed. Heavy, controlled, dangerous. Min-Jae closed his eyes. Not in shock, not in disbelief, in calculation. Because kings did not unravel over unexpected truths. They adjusted. Slowly, he turned back toward the desk. The digital report glowed against the darkness, clinical and unforgiving. Numbers, markers, genetic alignment laid out in cold precision. Facts did not care about emotional readiness. His son. The words did not form fully in his mind, not yet. They hovered at the edges, pressing against walls he had spent years reinforcing. Min-Jae reached forward and enlarged the photo. The boy stared back. Still. Observant. Unmistakable. For the first time in a very long time, something inside Min-Jae's chest misfired. A fracture. Small. But real. His fingers curled slowly against the edge of the desk. Continue surveillance, he said quietly. No hesitation in his tone. No visible crack. But his intelligence chief had worked for him long enough to hear what most people missed, the half-second delay before the command. Yes, Chairman. The line disconnected. Min-Jae remained standing there long after the screen dimmed. His mind was already moving, calculating timelines, reconstructing the past with ruthless clarity. Dates aligned, too cleanly. The separation. The silence that followed. The woman who had walked away without asking for anything. Zainab. Her name surfaced now, uninvited and sharp. Of course, she hadn't told him. The realization settled heavily. Not manipulation. Not strategy. Protection. For the boy, or from him. Min-Jae's jaw flexed. Because the most unsettling part of this discovery was not the existence of a child. It was the quiet understanding blooming beneath the surface of his control. Zainab had not run because she was weak. She had run because she knew exactly what kind of man he was becoming. And for the first time since he built his empire on perfect emotional discipline, Min-Jae found himself standing in the center of something he could not immediately dominate. Not the boardroom. Not the market. Not even the past. His gaze returned once more to the boy's photo, and this time, the silence around him felt different. Thinner. Unstable. Because blood, no matter how carefully ignored, had a way of rewriting the rules men thought they controlled. And somewhere deep beneath the king's ice-cold armor, the first real crack had begun to spread. By the time Zainab noticed something was different, the protection had already been in place for 3 days. Not obvious. Never obvious. That was the rule Min-Jae lived by. The first sign was so small she almost dismissed it. The streetlight outside her apartment, the one that had flickered for weeks, suddenly worked perfectly. Bright. Steady. Reliable. Zainab paused beneath it one evening, keys in hand, eyes narrowing slightly. Strange. She stepped inside anyway. Across the street, a black sedan idled for exactly 9 more seconds, then drove away. Min-Jae stood before a wall of quiet surveillance feeds thousands of miles away, expression carved from stone. Multiple screens glowed in the dimness of his office, each one tracking a different angle of Zainab's daily routine. Entry points, transit routes, blind spots, all being quietly erased. Keep distance, he instructed softly. Yes, Chairman. There would be no direct interference. No disruption to her carefully built independence. He understood Zainab well enough, even after all this time, to know that anything heavy-handed would trigger her instincts immediately. She had always been observant, always careful, which was exactly why the protection had to feel like coincidence. The pharmacy near her apartment suddenly upgraded its night security. Her usual ride route experienced fewer, random, traffic slowdowns. Even the small clinic where she occasionally consulted had, quite mysteriously, received a private security contract earlier that week. Invisible threads, all leading back to one man who had once sworn emotional distance was his greatest strength. Yet here he was, watching, adjusting, protecting. Min-Jae's gaze shifted to the smaller screen in the lower right corner.
The boy.
His son sat quietly at a table, small fingers moving carefully across a workbook. Focused, serious, unusually composed for his age. Min-Jae's chest tightened, brief, but undeniable. He didn't look away. Any anomalies? He asked. None, Chairman. Both subjects remain unaware.
Good.
That was how it needed to stay.
For now.
Because this was not about reclaiming anything. Not yet. Not until every variable was understood, every potential threat eliminated. Control first. Always. Still, as Zainab stepped out of her building the next morning, sunlight catching softly against her face, something unfamiliar pressed quietly against the edges of Min-Jae's discipline. Not weakness. Not regret. Something more dangerous. Recognition. She looked stronger. Sharper. Untouchable in a way that had nothing to do with money or power. Min-Jae's fingers stilled on the desk. Interesting. Very interesting. Because the woman he remembered had been resilient. But the woman on his screen now looked like someone who had learned how to survive without him. And for the first time since initiating the operation, the king who controlled everything began to understand one quiet, unsettling truth. Protection was the easy part. Winning back what he lost was going to be war. Power always attracted attention. But uncertainty? Uncertainty drew predators. The first probe came disguised as routine market pressure. A minor supplier abruptly withdrew from one of Min-Jae's secondary logistics chains. On the surface, it looked like ordinary corporate friction, the kind his empire absorbed without breaking stride. Min-Jae noticed anyway.
He always did.
By midnight, 3 more irregularities surfaced. A delayed shipment in Busan. An unusual data ping brushing the outer edge of one of his financial firewalls. Small things. Quiet things. Coordinated things. Min-Jae stood in the center of his office, hands resting lightly behind his back, eyes scanning the wall of intelligence reports with surgical calm. Their testing response time, his chief of security said carefully. Min-Jae didn't answer immediately, because he was already 3 moves ahead. They smell distraction, he said at last, voice smooth as polished steel. Silence followed. Both men understood what was left unspoken. For years, Min-Jae's empire had projected one unshakable truth. The king never divided his attention, never hesitated, never left openings. But surveillance bandwidth had shifted. Resources had quietly moved. Patterns had changed. And somewhere in the shadows of the global corporate underworld, rival syndicates were beginning to notice. Min-Jae's gaze flickered briefly, almost imperceptibly, to the smaller monitor at the edge of his desk. Zainab's street. Still secure. Still quiet. Still under his protection. His jaw tightened. Identify the source, he ordered. Yes, Chairman. We're already narrowing the field. Of course they were.
His team was elite.
But Min-Jae understood predators better than most. They didn't attack the fortress first. They circled. They tested. They waited for the moment the king looked away. Across the city, in a private room far removed from Min-Jae's glass tower, another group of men studied their own set of screens. His patterns changed 2 weeks ago, one of them murmured. Personal interest, another asked. A slow smile answered. Everyone has a weakness, eventually. Back in his office, Min-Jae's phone vibrated once, a priority alert. New movement detected near Zainab's residential district. The air in the room shifted instantly.
Cold.
Focused. Lethal. Details, Min-Jae said quietly. Unknown observers, his security chief replied. Too clean to be random. Min-Jae's eyes darkened.
So.
The circling had already begun. For a long moment he said nothing. His mind moved with terrifying speed, recalculating risk matrices, exposure windows, defensive layers. The board was changing, and someone out there was bold enough to test him while his attention was divided. A dangerous mistake, because Min-Jae did not lose focus. He adapted. Slowly, deliberately, he reached forward and expanded the surveillance grid around Zainab's location. Double the shadow perimeter, he ordered softly. No visible presence. I want ghosts watching ghosts. Yes, Chairman. The line disconnected. Min-Jae remained still, eyes hard as tempered glass. They thought they sensed weakness. They thought the king was distracted. What they didn't understand, what they were about to learn the hard way, was this. Min-Jae had built his empire in war. And if his enemies wanted to step out of the shadows, he would be more than ready to meet them there. Zainab noticed the pattern on a Tuesday, not because it was obvious, because something inside her had learned long ago to respect the feeling of wrongness before it had a name. It started with silence, the kind that felt too clean. Her usual walk home was rarely peaceful. There were always sounds, distant generators humming, late traffic groaning through the streets, neighbors arguing softly through open windows. Tonight, the air felt arranged. Zainab slowed slightly, eyes forward, posture relaxed. But her senses sharpened. Across the street, a man stood beside a kiosk, pretending to scroll through his phone. Ordinary enough. Except he hadn't moved in 3 minutes. Her fingers tightened slightly around her bag strap. Don't react. Don't assume. But don't ignore. The quiet rules she had lived by for years slid back into place with practiced ease. She kept walking. Behind the tinted glass of a parked vehicle half a block away, Min-Jae's security team adjusted their positions in silence. Subject awareness level rising. One operative murmured. Maintain distance, came the immediate reply through the comms. High above Seoul, Min-Jae watched the live feed without blinking. Of course she noticed. Zainab had never been careless. What concerned him wasn't her awareness. It was the second presence his team had flagged 15 minutes earlier. Unidentified. Professional. Watching the same target. His jaw hardened. Back on the street, Zainab reached her building but didn't immediately enter. Instead, she paused at the gate, pretending to search her bag while her eyes swept the reflection in the glass security panel.
There.
Movement. Too controlled to be random. A cold ripple slid down her spine. Someone was watching. The certainty settled quietly into her bones. Not panic, not fear. Recognition. Because life had taught her the difference between coincidence and intention. Inside the parked vehicle, Min-Jae's voice cut through the calm line, low and precise. Shift perimeter. I want visual confirmation on the secondary observer. Yes, Chairman. For the first time since initiating the operation, the temperature in the room around him felt unstable. Not because of Zainab, because of whoever else had started circling. On the ground, Zainab finally stepped through her gate, movements smooth, unhurried. To anyone watching, she looked calm. Normal. But once the door to her apartment closed behind her, she didn't move toward the kitchen. Didn't reach for her phone. She stood very still in the center of the room, listening, breathing slow, thinking. Her instincts were rarely wrong. And, tonight, something was definitely too close. Miles away, Min-Jae's eyes remained locked on the screen, every line of his body coiled with quiet readiness. The game was shifting faster than expected, and if his enemies had truly moved their attention toward Zainab, his expression darkened, something dangerously protective surfacing beneath the king's perfect control. They had just made a very expensive mistake. Min-Jae did not believe in impulsive decisions. Every move in his life had always been measured, calculated, controlled, until tonight. The moment the secondary observer's identity came back flagged, not random, not local, but tied to one of the syndicates that had been quietly circling his empire, the equation changed. Risk threshold exceeded. Containment required. For the first time since he built his rule around emotional distance, Min-Jae made a decision that did not wait for perfect timing. He moved. Zainab had just finished securing the last window when the knock came. Not loud. Not aggressive. 3 precise taps. Her body went still. Every instinct sharpened instantly. No one visited her unannounced. Slowly, carefully, she moved toward the door. She didn't open it immediately. Instead, she checked the small security screen mounted beside the frame. And the world tilted. Min-Jae stood outside her door like a man carved from memory and consequence. Immaculate as ever. Controlled as ever. But his eyes were different. For exactly 2 seconds, Zainab forgot how to breathe. Then her spine straightened. The door opened. Silence flooded the space between them. Up close, the years between them felt thinner than they had any right to be. Min-Jae's presence still carried that same quiet gravity, the kind that filled a room without trying. Zainab crossed her arms slowly, shielding her center. "You shouldn't be here," she said calmly. Not surprised. Not soft. Min-Jae's gaze moved over her face with dangerous precision, as if confirming she was real and not another ghost from his past. "I didn't come for permission," he replied quietly. The old tension sparked instantly. Familiar. Sharp.
Alive.
Zainab's eyes narrowed slightly. "You don't get to appear in my life when it's convenient for you." Something flickered, brief and volatile, behind Min-Jae's controlled expression. "If I waited for convenience," he said, voice lower now, "you would already be in danger."
The air changed.
Not dramatically, but enough. Zainab stilled, because beneath the cold authority in his tone there was something else. Urgency. Real. Unfiltered. Her voice dropped, quieter but edged. "Explain." For the first time since he knocked on her door, Min-Jae stepped closer. Not invading, but close enough that the space between them felt charged with everything they had never finished saying. "You're being watched," he said. Zainab's pulse kicked once, hard, but her face remained composed. "I've handled worse." Min-Jae's jaw tightened. "I know," he said softly. And there it was. Recognition. Respect. Dangerous familiarity, sliding back into place. For the first time in years, the king who outlawed love stood face to face with the one woman who had ever walked away from him, and realized too late that distance had never been the same thing as control. Because standing this close to Zainab again, Min-Jae had just broken his most important rule. And neither of them would walk away from this unchanged. Min-Jae did not leave immediately. That alone told Zainab how serious this had become. He stood just inside her doorway now, presence contained but unmistakably alert, as if every shadow in the room had already been measured and filed away in his mind. The air between them still carried the quiet aftershock of recognition. Zainab watched him carefully. "You said I'm being watched," she said. "By who?" Min-Jae's gaze didn't waver. "A syndicate that usually doesn't waste time on small targets." Her brow lifted slightly. "And yet here we are." A brief flicker, almost approval, crossed his eyes. "You were never a small variable, Zainab." The words landed heavier than either of them expected. Silence stretched. Then Min-Jae reached into his inner pocket and placed a slim, encrypted device on the table between them. "Your perimeter is already reinforced," he said. "But this gives you direct access if anything shifts." Zainab didn't touch it. "Not yet." "You're restructuring," she said quietly, studying him instead of the device. "I can see it on your face." Min-Jae paused. Most people missed the signs when he moved pieces on the board. Zainab never had. Yes, he admitted. Outside his empire, the changes had already begun moving into place with surgical precision. Resource divisions were being quietly reassigned. Surveillance networks expanded. 2 regional partnerships terminated. Not publicly, but decisively. Because the moment his enemies had stepped too close to Zainab, the situation stopped being theoretical. This was no longer containment. This was positioning for war. "You're escalating," Zainab said. Min-Jae met her eyes fully now. "I'm preventing escalation." Her lips almost curved. Almost. "You always did prefer control to honesty." For the first time since entering her apartment, something unguarded slipped briefly through his composure. Not anger. Something more complicated. "Control keeps people alive," he said quietly. The words hung between them, heavier now, layered with everything neither of them was ready to unpack. Across the room, the small bedroom door shifted slightly. Both of them noticed. Instantly, Min-Jae's body went still in a way that had nothing to do with business strategy. Zainab exhaled slowly.
So,
The moment had arrived sooner than expected. The door opened just a fraction more. Small footsteps. Careful. Observant. Min-Jae didn't turn fully. Didn't rush. But something deep and unfamiliar moved beneath the steel of his control as he finally allowed his gaze to shift toward the hallway. Legacy wasn't supposed to feel like this. Complicated. Unpredictable. Dangerously human. Zainab's voice came soft but steady beside him. "Min-Jae. A warning. And something else. Because whatever came next wouldn't just reshape empires. It would rewrite the rules both of them had survived by. And for the first time since the game began, the future was no longer entirely in the king's control.